Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're pleased to welcome you to our very first Games for Change Industry Circle Google Hangout. And today we have Cognito. So thanks for joining us. My name is Sarah Cornish. I'm a project director at Games for Change here in New York City. Please note that we will have an audience Q&A session starting at about 1:30 or so, where you can ask questions via this Google Hangout platform. And so if you have a question, during the conversation, you can engage the Q&A tool, which is on the top of your screen. It's a teal colored Q&A button, and that will enable you to type in questions during the Hangout. And a warning, we may not get to every single question, but we really appreciate your participation, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So thank you. So the Games for Change Industry Circle is an initiative of Games for Change that aims to acknowledge the achievements and challenges in the growing social impact games industry. We're recognizing some of the businesses and entrepreneurs who are taking risks, developing viable business models, and emerging as leaders in this Games for Change sector. We believe that identifying and sharing best practices and lessons learned can inspire and invite others to forge new paths in this field. The industry circle includes Kognito, who we're talking to today, as well as Amplify, BrainPop, the Global Gaming Initiative, Glass Lab, Filament Games, and Shell Games. So I'm very pleased to have the CEO of Kognito, Ron Goldman, here with us today, who will speak about how Kognito is changing health behavior through games. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to Kognito and to Ron, and then he will give a little bit more information about what Kognito is up to. So Kognito is one of the founding members of the Games for Change Industry Circle. Kognito is a game development company focused on health-related behavior change through immersive gaming experiences. Kognito was established in 2003 by co-founders Ron Goldman, the CEO who's here with us, and Glenn Albright, a PhD and director of applied research. Kognito's core approach is based on research in neuroscience and game mechanics. Users practice and role-play real-life situations by talking with virtual humans, and each conversation experience simulates interactions and behaviors of healthcare professionals, caregivers, students, educators. And so Kognito's experiences and design conversations address chronic diseases, post-traumatic stress disorder, behavioral health, substance abuse, among many others, and their clients span more than 450 organizations. Including the Department of Defense, many universities, Veterans Affairs, hospitals, NGOs, and more. And so I'd like to welcome Ron to talk more about Kognito, and then we'll start asking a few questions. So sure. Thank you, and go ahead, Ron.
Sure, thank you. Happy to be here. I guess this is the first one, so it's great to start. A little bit about us, although this is really much more about Games for Change and all of us as a community. But we are a studio in New York City, been around for about 10 years. We have a staff of 50 people. Half of them are busy building our simulations and games. So everything from game designers to instructional designers to developers. A lot of what we do has a core in psychology and behavioral change, so we have a number of experts in that field. And our core concentration is really about leveraging conversations with virtual humans as a way to drive changes in health and perceptions around social issues. So, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So very first question, just kind of to give more of an overview, how do you envision the Games for Change community crystallizing and then growing toward becoming a more self-sustaining industry, Ron?
Well, so I mean, I think from a time, if you look at where we are, considering this has been going on for I think over a decade now, since Games for Change started. I think we are probably in the most exciting period, not including obviously the beginning, where you can see companies that are really building a whole business around Games for Change and are really being successful. You see less random projects by a group of a few people who are getting together doing something really remarkable, but that doesn't have legs and doesn't sustain itself. So I think this is the point where you're starting to see the growth, but it's also the point where if you look at similar industries, if we're not very careful about what really needs to happen for us to move from a community to a self-sustained growing industry that doesn't rely just on grant money or a foundation to support us, you have to really pay attention to those. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I think this is a great idea that you guys are putting this together and are putting this conversation in front of people. And we all have a very strong social mission, but it doesn't mean that talking about sustainability or growth or revenue should not be discussed. I think it's actually critical to do it, and you can look at other industries like documentary films that have not lost their passion and mission and social cause and are still very much being run and viewed as a business. And I think that there is a great combination of doing good while doing good, and that's okay. Can't hear her. Do you know why I'm not hearing her? No. I cannot hear you. Sorry.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me repeat that question.
Thank you.
So at the 2015 Games for Change Festival in New York City this past April, you hosted and organized a panel discussion with Games for Change President Asi Borak on the state of the industry. And this was a town hall event that brought together industry leaders of our Games for Change industry circle. And in kind of a response to the discussion that day, you authored the first in our newsletter series of the Games for Change industry circle. And that article outlined the 7 keys to Games for Change success, the first of which is the business model. And so if you could talk a little bit about why a working business model is such a critical component of building a scalable business in this Games for Change industry, and some different models that you would suggest the community explores. Right. Thanks.
Yes. So first of all, just for clarification, this 7 keys for Games for Change success is a starting point. I think that what I'm excited about is to see how this conversation continues, and maybe we end up with different 7 keys. Maybe we end up with 20. This is just to put something in front of people to start having this conversation. So the first one, in terms of a business model, I think that's critical. I don't think I'm really educating anybody here about the fact that if you can build content that you can generate recurring revenue from, it's better than a project that you sell once and that's it. And if we're in the business of content, which we are, then if you look at content companies or media companies, you know that the way that they've been able to generate growth was by having content that they own or co-own, and that they're continuously selling again and again and again. So that business model is a business model that's a little bit tricky, because if you get funded by grants or by research grants, foundation money, then usually they own the IP. So you're pretty much doing a custom job. You're pretty much saying, here it is, it's not mine anymore, it's yours, do what you do with it, but I'm never going to see more money out of it. So inherently, the approach of a new community is usually relying on foundations and grant money or government grant money, and at some point it becomes a problem. So it's great to start with, but at some point you have to start transitioning. So we, for example, as a company, have decided from the beginning that we want to build a company that can be self-sustained. So from the beginning, for the first few years, we did custom work, and then we stopped. And we said, okay, starting now, we know enough about the market. We've done enough due diligence. Let's start building products that we can license to multiple organizations through what's known as a SaaS model, right? Nothing new, but a fairly common business model. And that's what we've been doing. So right now, if you look at our revenue, for example, as a company, 80% of the revenue comes from a portfolio of products that we license again and again to organizations, sometimes with a little bit of modification. So this will be a game for a Department of Health or the VA or a hospital that they will integrate and use as part of what they're providing consumers, patients, educators, doctors. And then 20% is still this, one-off custom projects, which are great. They're usually, you can try new things in it, you can innovate a little bit more. If you get a passionate client, you can do very significant things with. We're working on a project now with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, trying to change how parents, interact with their kids. That's a great goal. And if we can move the needle in it, that's great. And so we're still doing that. But I think the point for a business model is that some point in your growth as an organization, you have to decide which place you are. And we found from our personal experience, which doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone, that when we start sticking to the SaaS model, the build content, own content, license the content, that it allowed us to grow much rapidly and be less dependent on the next grant or the next foundation showing up and giving us a project. That's very stressful as a business owner to live by, the next project.
Sure, that's great. Thank you. And relevantly, speaking about funding sources, and you recommend diversifying your sources of funding. So could you talk a little bit about kind of venture capital and investment?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go there, that's a different discussion. I think in terms of projects, so one of the things that when you look at a game or a game-based simulation, and you only look at it as a game, you're really limiting your potential clients, right? Because now you're going to start looking online, okay, who cares about games? Who's in games for health? Who's into games for change? Who showed up to the conference? And that's your only market potential. If you start looking at your games as an intervention, as an experience that drives changes in skill, in behaviors, in attitudes, your universe becomes much bigger. Right? I mean, look at some of the other companies in this industry circle, from BrainPop. I mean, for example, they sell to K-12 schools. They sell to parents. They don't look at their work as games. They look at it as educational software. And I know that there will be some critics that will say, well, that's not really games for change. It's more of an educational software. But the point is that they looked at what they're creating as much more than just a game-based experience. So when we work as a company, we look at what we create as a solution, and then we look at everybody. That can be somebody who's in charge of corporate training at a Fortune 500, somebody who's in charge of mental health at a state level, somebody at some sort of a DoD facility that is looking for suicide prevention programs. And for us, they are the clients. So diversifying the sources of funding for projects, I think it's all about how you look at what you build. And that's one thing that we mentioned in the industry circle at the conference. The other point that you bring up about VC money, we've been in business for over 10 years. We got to where we got without any outside capital by reinvesting profits over the years in the company, and worked well for us. And about, where are we now? About 3 months ago, we did secure a first round of VC money to help us in our growth. And, with all its stresses and all its complexity that comes with it, for us, we waited as long as we could to build a sustainable, growing business. And now this institutional funds are coming in to help us grow the brand, grow the marketing that we do around, and obviously build more programs. But this goes to the core about, it has to do with just an understanding that it's okay to look at what we do as a business, because if we don't, we're just not going to be around. And I think like the end of the blog post has this quote, which I've heard in other places, where the biggest fear, which I would agree, is that we don't want to be in a place that 10 years from now people will have a conversation about, remember those great Games for Change people? There was so much excitement, so much spirit, and then it's just evaporated. I mean, we don't want that. So for me, when I talk about sources of funding and looking beyond what you have as a game, or looking beyond just a federal grant or a foundation as the sources of income, or looking at the VC market, looking at the angel market, where you can see that. I mean, we're one example, and there are other on the industry circle and other companies in the Games for Change community that have gotten money from the outside. So there's nothing wrong with that. And so one of the goals here was just to broaden the understanding about how far games can go, and therefore their appeal to non-government, non-foundations, and also to institutional investors that see the results. So that's where that kind of came from, as just something to put on the table for discussion.
Okay, great, thank you. To switch gears slightly, could you talk a little bit about the role of empirical research in Cognito's work?
Yes. So we're a little bit fortunate because the company started by two people, myself, which is more on the business development, marketing, game design side, and my colleague, which is Dr. Glenn Albright, who's a clinical psychologist and a researcher. So to begin with, for us to do things that are embedded in research in terms of applied research, so everything that we do to look at what has already been done in terms of showing how people really change behaviors and perceptions, and integrating that, but also having the basic foundation to actually do research was part of what we did. So we're a little bit spoiled in that sense, because my partner, that's what he does, and that's the only thing he knows how to do. Not that he doesn't know other things, but that's the main core of what he does. So we got spoiled. But so if we talk about companies that are not having that, I think that you have to find a place to or a partner to do it. And again, this is where it comes to definition. So if you call a research institute and you say, I have this game and I want you to study it, a lot of researchers don't know what you're talking about, and they get scared about, well, I don't know games, I don't know how to assess it, so they just stay away from it. If you talk about it as, I have this online or mobile experience or an intervention that I want to study its impact, you will hear very different responses. So I think that in our case, we do a lot of things around changing health behaviors. Therefore, we talk to people who are in the healthcare industry or in the federal government. We have a lot of work with universities and K-12 systems, where I simply cannot give you anything that does not have any studies behind it. So I think that if you go the route of a business model where you start building content that you license, at that point, I'm buying the product. So you need to show me that the product works, and you can do it by saying, all these people bought it, let me play it, but you need the evidence. So we simply would not be where we are if I couldn't pull an empirical study after an empirical study and show you that it works. This is why we have 3 simulations that are listed on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. It's a long, fancy name of a federal government registry where you can submit anything. You can submit a game, you can submit a paper, you can submit a book. And if you show the evidence behind it, they will identify it as evidence-based. So we have 3 of those, which gives us a huge leg up when I go to the VA, right? So I think that if you don't go the route of a business model where you sell me products and you only sell me consulting services, then yes, maybe you can get around not having evidence that your stuff works, because then I'm buying you and your skill. And so I want to look at similar projects that you have done. But if you're going that other route of products, you have to have it. And I think more importantly, and it's one of the main keys, is that we're still, when we talk to each other, we all know how powerful this is. But when you go to other people who are not in this industry, they, and you call my dad. I mean, he'll be like, "That there's no way that you can get military families to know how to support their veteran when they're coming back and talk to them about seeking help using this game-based virtual human thing." He's like, he looks at it, he'd be like, "There is no way to do it." And the only way for me to convince him is not to let him play it, because he's 90 years old, he's not going to play it, is to pull a study and say, "Here you go. This is a study that was published that shows the efficacy of this program." So if we're trying to, again, broaden our appeal of clients and funding sources and going to the point where we can sell existing programs, you gotta have the evidence. If you wanna get any VC to look at you, you gotta have evidence. There's simply no way. And I get a little bit annoyed, I will agree, when I go to conferences and people talk about assessment, and then I say, "Okay, so how are you assessing this?" And be like, "Well, I know how many people went in and where they're coming from and what browser they're using." And I'm like, who cares? You're not selling marketing. So stop assessing your stuff by clicks. It's not about how many people clicked on it. It's what happened as a result of them going through the experience, right? You're not in the business of selling a product. You're in the business of changing perception, changing behaviors. Unless you can document that, it just doesn't count. So for me, it's a little bit scary to see a lot of games and simulations coming out there. Some of them are amazing that are not integrated with some sort of a research component. And when I say research, it doesn't have to be a 5-year randomized control study that cost $500,000. I mean, we have done plenty of studies that using SurveyMonkey, doing pre-post and follow-up, getting a group of 50 or 100 people where we can talk to them more. You can do this fairly on the cheap side without getting special funding to do this. And you have a lot of researchers and students who work in different programs that would love to have the opportunity to work with you on it. And you see more of that. I don't think I'm saying something that people don't understand. I think there is a higher recognition of it, but there's also still a lot of fear about what it means to do study, which is why one of the things I suggested to Asi is like, let's start giving more examples of a study. So people can see that it doesn't have to be like a 5-year $1 million thing in order to show that something works.
Right. Great. So you've talked a lot about different ways that the Games for Change community can become more credible and viable. We need more diverse and successful use cases. We need better ways of reporting. So are there any other kind of elements that you think that the community needs, or ways that we can kind of come together to validate our vision?
No, I mean, I think I touched on kind of the main thing from the business model. I think that the other thing has to definitely be to be a little bit more honest with ourselves about how we define the change. Because as more people look at what we do, they are going to be a little bit more critical of what we do. So this is where sometimes I hear people being critical of things that we do or other people do that can be better defined as an educational software. If it's around math or around science, very important topics where games are remarkable, but it's not always seems like social change to a lot of people. So there's a little bit of us as we continue to kind of curate what is it that we're putting out there, and especially for you guys as the leading authority here, is what is being shown as social change and how it's being defined. So I think that's critical, so that those use cases, those examples that are putting out there are more and more like Half the Sky, right? So Half the Sky is a great example of like, you want somebody to understand what's a social change, here you go, this is the relevant topic. So I think that's the one point that maybe I haven't mentioned that is just important, and I think you see that in the Games for Change conferences. We'll be coming to those now for many years. And you see how initially it was very dominated by educational software about math and science. And more, those that compete in the competitions, those that are talking, are really just amazing examples of social change or health change that can be put out there in the United States and also internationally. I think there were some great examples in the conference about people from other countries showing really valuable stuff.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Ron.
Sure.
So we're going to open up to the audience. We've got lots and lots of viewers tuned in right now, so thanks again. You can also follow along on Twitter. We're using hashtag G4CIndustry. And you can ask questions via Twitter or via this Google Hangout platform if you use the Q&A button on the top of your screen. So we'll wait and see if any questions come in, and we've got a couple other ones that we can ask Ron.
Okay.
In the meantime,
sure.
So please go ahead and start entering in your questions. And Ron, while we're waiting for that, could you talk a little bit about how Cognito and others in the community are working to really change social issues and using, proving the efficacy of game-based experiences, but changing specific, social issues and health behaviors?
Yeah, I think that, what I see happens more and more is organizations and us as a community going after big topics and not being afraid to go right at them. So you see a lot of work around, for example, mental health has been a topic that you see more and more on those, and you see great collaboration between the for-profit and the non-profits. And you see more of those ended up being a little bit more commercialized. And I think that that's also, if you want to look at a trend, I think that, and we're right now engaged in a project with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and working with a project with the Hilton Foundation. That's more on our kind of 20% side of the one-off projects. And you can see that they're thinking more and more about sustainability beyond the project. I think that it calls for a lot of great opportunities for companies involved in Games for Change to go to their funders and have a conversation about the day after. Obviously, we're not dealing with books or a PDF document that you just put on the website and it's always there. These needs to be maintained, they needs to be promoted, they need to be pushed into different distribution networks. We do a lot of stuff around healthcare. For example, we're doing a project now to help patients know how to have better conversations with their doctor, right? How do you go when you go in and the doctor just gives you the blah, blah, blah with some terminology, you don't even know what it is, and you just nod your head and you're like, yeah, I get it, and you leave not knowing what happened. How do you empower yourself to be more activated in it? And there are a lot of organizations out there, a lot of them for-profit, by the way, that are pushing things for consumers to help them get educated. It's a big part of what the new Healthcare Act is all about the informed patient, the activated patient. So there's a lot of opportunities beyond, I think, the distribution of putting something online or putting it on the Games for Change website and hoping people come. So we see a lot of changes on the for-profit and non-profit collaborating, but also thinking about the day after, and also a lot of things going into this distribution networks. Again, if you don't define this as just a game, right? So if you start defining it as an intervention, as an experience, you start seeing that there's plenty of places for it. And I think that that's one of the challenges for all of us, which is broaden our view of that. So that's kind of the things that we're seeing for us as a company. We've done a lot of work around social issues like veterans and LGBTQ. We're getting involved now, as I mentioned, working with helping parents manage relationship with their kids ages 2 to 5 to overcome a diverse childhood experience. How do you don't just yell at your kid, but you figure out a better way of managing your own emotions and the relationship with them. We've done a lot of work around, as I mentioned, supporting LGBTQ students. We're doing something now around tolerance, just the topic of tolerance. How do you build tolerance by high school kids towards each other? So there's a lot of that, and not to mention, obviously, the whole issues of health behaviors around chronic disease, and around getting people to start taking care of themselves, if it means eating better, watching less TV, exercising more. We've done a great project that I think was in your competition last year with the American Academy of Pediatrics around child obesity. How do you change the behavior of the mom and the kid? And this is an app you guys can go to the App Store, to the Google or the Apple one, and you can download, just search for Cognito, and you'll see a few of what we have, including that one. So I think you're seeing a broader appeal of what we do, which is why I'm excited, which is why it's great to see this is growing, and why this is good that we have this conversation now, because again, I don't want to be there in 10 years talking about nostalgically how great it is. That won't excite me.
Great. So where do you, this is a question from Michael Lynch, where do you publish your research? Are there journals that are specifically interested in this topic?
So again, I mean, there is, we've published and publishing is very difficult, as any researcher will tell you. There is a few places. There is definitely the Games for Health journal, was one place where we have been able to publish a number of papers. They were just added, by the way, to the PubMed publication, so their ranking have went up significantly, so it's even more worthwhile publishing there. And then we published on the regular journals, right? So if we do something in mental health, then there is a journal around mental health research, and there is a number of journals around veterans that we published at. So we looked at publication just as if we were any researcher. We don't necessarily just look at the ones that are dedicated for games or simulations. We've actually been more successful in that because these journals are looking for something different. And it's also usually end up with a much larger audience. There's also been a push for a little bit of more of those open source publications, which actually requires you to pay in order to be published. It's still peer reviewed, but the turnaround is much faster, so they will be able to get something out in 6 weeks instead of something that can take a whole year sometimes. So there is no particular place. If you go to our website, we have a research tab. On the top, you can see a number of the papers, and you can see where they were published as well.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So the next question is via Twitter. Again, we're at hashtag G4C Industry. This is from Jolene Fisher, and Jolene asks, if social change should be inclusive, how do we ensure smaller groups' voices and ideas are not squeezed out as the industry grows?
Again, obviously you don't want to squeeze anybody out. I think that it has to come to a definition. I think it's one of the burdens that you guys have as Games for Change, is to help us define what's in it and what's not in it. And I don't wish that challenge on me, but I definitely don't think that we need to create a definition that exclude anything that we all comfortably can say is really a social change. Directly a social change, by the way, because indirectly everything is, and everything you can make a case that even learning how to do a math equation will make you a smarter, more capable person that can go to college, and because you came from a poor family, that means I helped you do a social change. But we all can agree that it's a little bit of a stretch. But I don't have a definition. I'm not going to propose a definition, but I think it needs to be a direct direct impact on your social or behavior or capability.
Okay, thanks. Next, Aussie asks, for a healthy games for impact industry, what do you think should be the future balance between grants and project-based work for hire efforts versus sustainable product services?
So I'll tell you what I hope can happen, and that will solve all the issues, which is that all of us become more demanding of these foundations, research grant, in terms of the commercialization aspect of things, so that the foundation understand that it's in their benefit to allow the game studio to commercialize the program, so that the studio has recurring revenue, and that the program, the intervention, the game lives longer. So it just doesn't die, because the company now has an incentive to do that. So if that happens, then we don't have a conversation on it. But if it doesn't happen, I think that, I mean, I don't want to try to suggest a percentage. In our case, it's very much an 80-20, with the 20% being kind of the one-off. But it takes time to get there. I mean, when we started, it was 100% one-off, and it took us about 4 or 5 years until we got to the place where we can start commercializing products to start reducing that percentage down. So it depends a lot on the organization and on really on your long-term goal. And that's also something that I think small groups, and I've now got to know a lot of them, of very talented people getting together, and all they talk about is that project that they're working on. And that's, you know, really because it's a really exciting project, but they're not thinking about what happens later. And in many cases, they find themselves without the next project. So I think a lot of this comes to maybe a little bit of self-discipline, about saying, if we're really committed as a team to go all the way and build a sustainable business, can we think 5, 6, 10 steps ahead, so that maybe we also pick the projects that will serve us, even if they are one-off and they are a research grant, but those that will serve us as we go. It feels a little bit too much opportunist. Whatever comes, we'll take, and we'll try somehow to figure it out. And you need to be very lucky for that to work. That's usually not what an investor will suggest that you do. So again, I'm not going to suggest a percentage. I think a lot of it has to do with a self-definition of who you are, what you want to become, and then finding the path to get there.
Okay, great. Lucrezia Bizgani asks, is there a business model you've seen work for nonprofits to build games for low-income communities?
So this is interesting. So that there, again, obviously you cannot group nonprofits, but you have a lot of nonprofits, and you can look at it. So about 10 years ago, or a little bit more, when e-learning, okay, that word we don't want to say, came out, one of the biggest way in which they have built their business was to go to these nonprofits, these professional associations, or associations that service the public, a certain group of the public with, as members, and they offered to build them content that they can then sell to their members, or add as a part of the benefits that they provide their paying members. And it worked very well. I mean, there are companies that went public because of their ability to line up a bunch of these associations and nonprofits and become their content developer. So those for-profits have an interest in, they are very, very similar to all of us. They are trying to create recurring revenue, because they, just like us, realize that working on just money from a big donor doesn't work very well. So they're looking for that. I mean, in all honesty, part of the conference for you guys as Games for Change is another way of creating some sort of a predictable revenue stream, right? So I think that there's a great opportunity when it comes to how would you suggest working with those nonprofits, is go to those that are interested in recurring revenue, and build a case with them to say, yes, let's build this thing together, but let's try to find a way of sustaining it. Now, you can sustain it by selling it, right? You can sell it to end users, you can sell it to other organizations, or you can continuously try to sell it to foundations or other donors that will want to contribute money into it. So it's just all about thinking about this stuff from the beginning, and in all honesty, understanding that the other side of this nonprofit is as interested in growing the revenue in terms of recurring revenue as you are. And therefore, when you actually start talking to them like that, they're very happy, because all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I can actually, it doesn't just need to be a spend. It can be something that start bringing money back to me as an organization. So suggestion, if I could, that would be one of them.
Okay, great. So we've got time for 2 more questions. First one is, what challenges are critical to overcome in order to deliver an experience that doesn't intimidate non-technical users? And that's coming from Flat Duck.
Yeah, well, that's a workshop by itself. I mean, it's right now, for example, when I talked about the parenting simulation that we're doing, and it's aimed at vulnerable, what's referred to as vulnerable population, right? So those are individuals that may have low literacy. They may be, English might be their second language. They might not be very comfortable with a lot of the interactive gaming technologies that we all are. And the only way for you to address it is by doing a lot of prototyping and a lot of focus groups. And in the project we have right now, we meet with parents, and I hold the iPad and I say, look at this. And I literally videotape them as they try to interact with it, so we can continuously learn what's the best design, what's the best language to use. And so it's all about this kind of, again, this iterative process of adjusting what you're doing and not showing up with a template and say, this worked for the guy with a master's degree should work for you, because that's obviously not the case. So a lot of it is that. I do have to say that I think that when you look at statistics, a lot of the low literacy, low income are having, they don't buy a desktop anymore. They buy a phone. They buy a smartphone. So there's actually, in terms of access to these individuals, they in some cases have more advanced technology if you try to get to K-12 teachers that may have more limited old desktop that they're using. So there's advantages and disadvantages on that end.
Thank you. Okay, so final question from Mark Delura. To what extent do you work with game programs at colleges and universities? Do you engage with programs to find undergrads and grads to hire, or to discuss games for change?
So all of the above. So we had the opportunity in some cases to speak to programs that, gaming design programs, which is great to talk to those students and tell them that this is not just a great idea, but there's actually people who make a living out of it. So that's kind of on that end. In terms of hiring, so yes, I mean, we have a lot of internships and definitely hiring. I mean, that's where we get a lot of our people, is to people who graduated from these programs. There's some great programs and people who come out knowing a lot of stuff that we don't know. So yes, that's what we work with, and we have a good relationship with a lot of the departments. And I think it's important that we go there, because one of the keys that maybe needs to be added in here is to build more people who join the community. So it's not just us and everybody else who already went to the conference, but it's those who are the 12-year-old, the 15-year-old, who are thinking about what they can do with something that they love. How do we talk to them? How do we engage them? There's a lot of work that's being done in this, but I do think that that's part of the goals for us as an industry, is to continue to want to bring more and more people into this, so it grows in numbers of individuals, not just in revenue, and for that sake. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ron Goldman from Cognito.
Sure.
It was great to speak with you today, and thank you everyone for tuning in. You can go back and watch this again. We'll be posting it to YouTube later today on the Games for Change YouTube channel. So thank you. And if you'd like to go back and see what the conversation on Twitter was like, we're at #G4C Industry. We also encourage you to check out the Games for Change Impact with Games report that will speak to a lot of these same questions and opportunities for the Games for Change industry. So thanks, and we'll talk to you next time, and stay tuned for more updates on the industry circle. So thank you so much, Ron. And
great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.